Hello everyone. It's finished. Finished enough for now anyway. The springs did eventually settle, but they were still way too high, so I snipped one coil out from each side, and it's had a proper alignment since. I put the stabilizer bar back on, and as you can see, the holes don't line up perfectly, but there is enough give in the link to compensate, so that works just fine. I got new bushings for these, but they didn't fit, so I reused the old ones. The spring, I learned the end of the coil needs to be sitting towards the inside, towards the frame rail, opposite of the way I had it. I had it sitting towards the wheel, and as a result, the springs bowed out on each side, which made it really difficult to install the shock absorbers. And I only did it that way because that's the way it was when I took it apart. But I looked at a whole bunch of other restored cars, and they all have them together this way, so I pulled the springs out, turned the carriers a half turn, and turned the springs a half turn, and put it back together. So they're sitting pretty straight now, and the shock absorbers just drop right on. If you're wondering why it doesn't have shock absorbers right now, it's because the ones I put on were shot, and I ordered new ones, and they're not here yet. How does it do on the highways? Let's find out. It's pretty stable once you get it moving. I mean, if we could find a smooth part of the road. Okay, so the steering, it's pretty easy. There's a few things I forgot to mention in the previous videos, and we'll go over them right now. So, if you're wondering why I chose the 64 to 66 Mustang for components, as like I said, it's more or less a direct carryover to the 1960 Falcon. Nothing was directly carried over, but everything is pretty much based off the same design, which means the mounting locations are the same. Now, in 67, the towers were redesigned for clearance for the bigger engines. On this engine bay, which is the same as the early Mustangs, the distance between the towers is just about wide enough for a 289 V8 or other engines in that family. And they're really tight around the shock towers. The exhaust manifolds are pretty close, and they're right where the control arm bolts too, so you can't notch anything out or clearance anything. So in 67, to fit the bigger engines like the 390s and whatever else they were using at the time, the towers were redesigned for more clearance, and the whole front suspension had to be redesigned as well. If you go to a car show and see a big row of old Mustangs with the hoods up, you can really see the 66 and earlier ones with 289s. There's not much space between the exhaust manifolds and the towers, whereas the 67s on up with the same engine, there's noticeably more clearance. The last thing I wanted to mention is a few things about wheel alignment. First thing is adjusting camber, and I'm not going to talk too much about these angles and what they do and their purposes. That I could make a whole nother video on that, but I'll talk about the basics here. The camber is adjusted by shimming the upper control arm from the body. The shim's like this. By the way, this shim is way too thick. I ordered the wrong size. But they go on like so between the arm and the body. These arms are deliberately made too short so they can be adjusted to the right size, because they can't be adjusted if they're too long. The lower control arms, on some other cars from this time, the cross member has an eccentric washer where they mount to that you can move around the location of the control arm for additional fine-tuning. The Falcon does not. It just has a hole in the cross member and it bolts on where it bolts on, and camber is completely adjusted with the upper control arm. The other adjustment is caster, and that is done by adjusting the length of the strut rod by turning the nuts at the end. By moving it forward or back. As I've said before, the later cars like the Mustangs don't have the range of adjustment like this. To adjust even greater angle, you can shim the upper control arm more on one side than the other to lean it one direction or another. So, until we meet again, happy motoring.